I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. Tom, would you like to introduce our very special guest today?
Absolutely. Tom, how you doing?
Doing good. Nice to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for coming on. And excuse me. I didn't get a chance to find out about your encounter, but you do a lot of different things. You work with the native communities. You do artwork for Bigfoot, Bigfoot related artwork, and you've had an encounter. I'm just going to hand it off to you, but start off with your encounter and then some of the stuff that you do.
Oh God, which encounter? I lived off northeastern Vancouver Island, which is my tribal traditional territories, were called Kwakwakiwak, otherwise known as Kwakiutl at one time, or Kwagyoth. But of all the First Nations in Canada, that's what we call us Indians, and North American Indians in the United States, I think with the traveling I've done and research, our tribe has the closest tie to Sasquatch, which we call Chonacha. And our villages to this day are just filled with what you would call totem poles. We call them dowry poles and welcoming poles, house poles in our traditional big houses where we hold our great potlatch ceremonies and feasts. And everywhere you go on Vancouver Island, you see the Chonacha, like Campbell River, our city, it's south. It used to be called Southern Kwakwakiwak, but they refer to themselves as Lechwata. There's 4 different tribes that make up them, but they're a small city. It's just filled with Chonacha carvings and has the world's largest wood carving of a Chonacha in the big house. And the graveyard behind the superstore, grocery store, there's a traditional memorial pole with a big Chonacha at the base, and everywhere you go in that city, you'll see carvings of them. And then when you go further north on Vancouver Island and you get up to the Port McNeill and take the ferry across to where I was born, Alert Bay, it's a community with the highest concentration of Chonachas on Earth. That whole town is filled with Chonachas. It's almost, I compare going to Alert Bay now like King Kong in the 1970s when you go to the native tribes and they got all these carvings of King Kong. That's almost what Campbell River and Alert Bay are like. And, it's, one thing, a lot of people look at him, they just think, it's a character with big lips and large breasts and sleepy eyes with outstretched arms. But that's our highest ranked crest. And, right from childhood, you're taught about Chonacha. You behave yourself because Chonacha's always watching. And if you misbehave and you act up as a kid, at nighttime, she's going to come with her basket or her sack, and she's going to shove that big hairy arm through the window or door or porthole on a boat, tent, and she's going to grab the misbehaving child and rub spruce sap from the evergreen tree into your eyes. It's like sticky syrup. And you're going to go blind. And then she's going to throw you in her basket on her back or her sack. And she's going to carry you deep into the forest to her invisible home. And that's where she's going to boil you up and eat you. So you behave yourself. So that's what I was brought up with. And then, I lived my life going to school, of course, and then being a commercial salmon seine fisherman in the summertime. When I got out of school, I became a commercial fisherman in every fishery pretty much on our coast. And I traveled the coast extensively. And I asked questions of other Indian tribes and homesteaders and locals and fishermen. What do you know about Bigfoot, Sasquatch? And then I would hear their tales from their regions. And it really was interesting. And commercial fishing collapsed on us in the early 1990s. And I was asked by my chief and council if I would go to our abandoned native village and be the native watchman. And our village had old totem poles on the ground. And even Emily Carr in the early 1900s painted that village what it looked like with the traditional big houses and all the totem poles. And some of the depictions were of Choracha, and there's quite a few in that village at one time. So I go there and I'm working as the native watchman in the summertime and no activity. You know, Junacha was around, but you didn't really pay no heed to it. But then fall came, and that's when we started hearing the whoop, 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 and the tree snaps and the tree knocks and the screaming. And all of a sudden we saw one behind our cabin trailer. We put a 26-foot trailer on the beach with a landing craft and built an addition, and that was our watchman cabin. We went there one October, and my worker spooked a big Sasquatch that was sleeping behind our trailer and under the hemlock and spruce branches. He didn't tell me that day. He just told me he ran into the trailer. I saw him from the window, so I grabbed both guns and we ran outside. I was suspecting a bear. And we looked around and I could smell this god-awful stink. And my partner, watchman, he was pretty shook up, but he didn't say anything until that night when we were going to bed. I'm at the end of the trailer in the bedroom. He's over where the trailer hitch kitchen is with 3 windows that he always used to have the blinds down. And I used to always tell him, Trevor, put the blinds down. I don't want Jonah looking at me when I'm trying to sleep. And he would just laugh and say, there's no such thing. Well, that night as I was going to sleep, I looked up from my book I was reading by candlelight, and all the 3 blinds were down. And Trevor was snoring away, and I was thinking, oh, that's odd. I went to sleep. Middle of the night, I woke up again, and I heard him snoring, but it was closer. And I turned my flashlight on, and there was Trevor sleeping in the hallway outside the bathroom. He didn't want to sleep by the window, and I kind of thought, I wonder what he saw yesterday. So the next day, we broke our camp. We had a boat coming in, and we were shuttling with my speedboat all of the generator and batteries and equipment out to the boat to shut the camp down for the season. And we were done. We put my speedboat on tow behind us, and we sat down on the hatch covers on deck and lit up a cigarette. And I said, well, we better say goodbye to native anchorage. They're home for the last few months. And then all of a sudden he looked at me and he goes, Tom, he goes, it wasn't a bear. I woke up. It was a Sasquatch. And he described it, basically Patty from the Bob Gimlin and Patterson film. And we didn't think nothing of it. The next year, we went back in there for the Watchman's program, and that's when we started noticing again in the fall that there were smells, noises, big tracks in the grass, and we never saw them until the year later. We no longer had the Watchman's program, and in the first week of October, I went in and I was the captain of a commercial fish boat. We went into native anchorage at the bay and we anchored out. We went ashore, and my girlfriend at the time, who was our cook, she mentioned, boy, it's sure quiet here, no birds. And that night, just as it was getting dark, Trevor, who was with me at the camp before, he's a crewman, he's in the galley with my girlfriend playing crib and BSing away and laughing, and boom boxes going, but not too loud. And me and the native crewman, Dean, were on deck cooking up with a Coleman gas stove on the hatch covers, a big pot of crab legs. We harvested probably about 100 Dungeness crab that day. And as we were cooking it, and you hear the hissing of the propane, and deathly quiet, moon's up now, little bit of cloud, no wind. All of a sudden you heard this big noise like this. A whistling chirp from the beach, and then a bang against the side of my trailer that was up on the beach. Well, that got me and Dean's attention, and like, wow, what was that? And then we noticed 2 big bipedal shadows walking by the front of the trailer. And remember, moon's out, it's pretty lit up, trailer's white, this faded gray cedar planks of the addition, and these 2 big, like humans, walked in front. And it whistle chirped again, and I turned the fuel off the stove so it quit making noise. I opened the galley door and I shut the boom box off, and I told Jojo, you guys be quiet, we think we got a Jonah on the beach. So Trevor and Jojo came on deck, and the first thing my girlfriend said was, boy, the beach stinks tonight. And Dean, who was on deck with me, he looked at her and said, Josie, when have you ever smelled the beach smell like that? And besides that, it's half tide rising. The shellfish beach is covered with water. They had clam dug together as kids and teenagers where they lived on the island where they grew up. And that thing made the whistle chirp again. And Trevor, who just bummed a cigarette off Jojo, was half smoked, and he was a chain smoker, and he was out. After that whistle chirp again, he looked at me and goes, "What is that, Tom?" I said, "What do you think it is? It's what you woke up there a couple of years ago, the Jonacha." Trevor flicked his cigarette overboard. He went to the galley door. He opened the engine room door. He went down the ladder across the metal grates to the engine rooms, opened up the bulkhead door to the forecastle where the 4 bunks were for the crew, and that slammed, and that's the last we saw of Trevor that night. It freaked him out that bad. And then time passes, and, I'm thinking, hey, let's put the spotlight on it. So we put the big, probably a 1,000,000-watt candlewatt or whatever they are, but a big boat, commercial fish boat spotlight. We lit up the beach, and there was a Sasquatch on the beach with her back to us, and she turned and dropped in the fetal position on her knees with her head under her right arm. You could see the reflection, but the big male that was standing up in the grass with the, about 10-foot high hemlock trees were as well. It dropped on its knee, and it had its right arm in front of its face. And you could tell it was moving and breathing because you'd see 2 eyes reflecting, and they were red-orange, and like really, really red in the beginning. Then with the spotlight, they went down to a reddish-orange, then an orange, and eventually a greenish-yellow. But for 20 minutes, we had those 2 Sasquatches, one kneeling on her hands and knees, and the other one on his knees with his arm in front of his face. We tried everything. We threw apples and carrots and you name it, potatoes, trying to get them to move. We pulled the camera out to take a picture, but it was a 35mm Instamatic with no film in it, and we're ripping drawers apart trying to find film, but we couldn't. And then eventually, that's when I said, "Hey, Dean, what was that rifle you brought on? Go get it." So he ran downstairs and came up with a gun case and opened it up, put his rifle on the railing outside the starboard rail of my seine boat, and I'm in the wheelhouse with the window down, and I got my 300 Savage iron sight pointed at the chest of the big male. And then Dean lifts his gun up, and I said, "I'll give a count of 3, 2, 1, and we'll squeeze off and keep squeezing." And all of a sudden, Jojo's, Tom, if you shoot a Sasquatch, your native legends is going to be the curse. It might not be you, but me and my kids will probably die." And she's carrying on about the curse of our native tribe. "And you're not supposed to disrespect it like that," she said. And that's when I kind of clued in. I go to Dean, I said, "What caliber you got there?" And he was 243. I'm like, "No, barrel up. And we both put our barrels up. I said, "That gun's too small, and I'm iron sight. And besides that, I think Jojo's right. We shouldn't harm it or disrespect it." So we put the guns away, kept trying to get them to move. They wouldn't. Turn the spotlight off, and that's when you heard the distinct thump, thump, thump as they're walking up from the beach, one and across the grass, and you could hear trees moving, brush, because they're just small shrubs. And all of a sudden you heard that, like the canopy wall where the second grows hemlock and cedars were. You could hear those branches being parted and the snaps of branches as they walked into the forest. And then you just heard this big, dead, rotten tree being pushed down. Crash, 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 boom. And then they disappeared. And Jojo goes to sleep. Trevor's freaked out. He's not on deck. He's downstairs. And then after about an hour or so, we heard some noise in the bay further in. Me and Dean threw the spotlight on again, and we could see the eye shine of one. And basically another almost 45 minutes goes by. We were seeing it, but it's, not clear. And if we took a picture, it'd be considered a blob squatch. We didn't have film. And then my boat kind of moved in the tide, and it's parallel in the beach. And we're about 60, 70 yards from the beach. Dean and I are on deck. And that's when all of a sudden you could see something come out of the bush, and it's walking along the high rock shore with the gray, weathered, dry drift logs, some of them 3 foot thick. So it's really illuminated now, and you can see the silhouette of this something that's low. So I ran into the wheelhouse. I hit the spotlight and hit it and lit it up. And I remember it standing up and the hairs hanging off its arms. And that's when it stood up. And then that's when I always remember the hair. You could see it hanging off its like upper arms. It was just long. And we're like, holy smokes. And Dean's like, what the F is that? And I'm like, Jesus, that thing's big. And that's when I ran to the galley up into the wheelhouse, turned the spotlight on and swung it just as it was walking into the forest. And you could see its arm go up and grab this silver alder tree by the trunk. And it was about 8 inches thick. And you see this big hand grab it. And this big hairy Sasquatch put its right leg up and step up about 5 feet onto the bush bank. And it sort of turned at us, and you could see on the skin through its hair on its shoulders. And then it just walked into the bush, and you could hear the noise of the bush. And all of a sudden, it made this deep whistle chirp, and then a higher pitched whistle chirp answered deep in the forest. And you could just hear the thing walking like it wasn't hiding no more. You'd hear the salal bushes just crunching and cracking. And that was our experience with Sasquatch. And Dean and I were like, wow, that was something. And we went to bed because we had to fish in a few days. And next morning we went and looked for tracks. Sure enough, there was tracks in the mud at high tide. We were looking over the side of the boat on the beach. Seen the tree that got pushed down, the usual stuff, follow up. But that was my first really good encounter with a Sasquatch. And when I got out of the commercial fishery that week and I went South Vancouver Island to my parents' place to visit, dropped some fresh salmon off, my dad goes, I told my dad about that sighting. And he goes, well, that's something. He goes, this guy with white hair and a beard, he was really bouncy and talked real fast, chattering. He stopped by. Here's his phone number. You should call him. He's a Bigfoot investigator. And the piece of paper said Dr. John Bindernagel and his phone number. So I called him up, went up to Courtney and went to his house and gave my interview. And that would start the lifetime friendship that Dr. John Bindernagel and myself had. And I could tell you stories about us going out investigating. But there you go. That was my first sighting.
I used to work on boats, and so just your maritime experience and knowledge and stuff, that's interesting. It has nothing to do with Bigfoot, but it just strikes a chord with me. I got a question for you. This is something Will and I have been talking about last couple of days, and that is when it's raining, and we're all from the Pacific Northwest. When it rains, we can get rain. Birds don't chirp in the rain. I just want to get your take on that. So when you hear something that sounds like a bird deep in the forest where you got heavy canopy and it's chirping or whistling, do you think that's a bird, or do you think it's these guys?
The carrion birds, they'll still talk during the rain. I know what you're talking about with the other ones, the dick birds and so forth. They won't make noise in the rain. It's because they don't want to give out their location because they can't hear anything coming at them or really smell because it's everything's dampened by that rain. But yeah, no, you're definitely right. Like it's, you hear a raven, an eagle at night. Darn well that wasn't a raven or an eagle. It was a Sasquatch. They're the master of mimicking.
Yeah.
We go to conferences, my wife and I, Peggy, and we bring my family's regalia that we've made. That's Chonach wood carved mask, regalia outfit of fur, cedar bark basket on her back. And as I'm talking on the stage of the Bigfoot conferences, I'm sharing the Kwakwaka'wakw perspective, beliefs, and my encounters. But the new mask now, we have mouthpieces where she hides herself and she comes up and there's a eagle beak in her mouth and she disappears and comes back and she's got a bear mouthpiece in her mouth. And she goes through this, and we're going to have more mouthpieces till eventually we have about 10. And what it is the composers and my friends and families that I don't sing myself. I'm more of a speaker, but they're composing me a native Kwakwala sung song that tells the story of me traveling around British Columbia coastal area, Northwest Territories, Canada, Omaha Indian Reserve, Washington State. And it's telling you of the different animals I've heard being mimicked by Sasquatch. And I've heard everything from coyotes to whippoorwillows in Omaha, frogs, eagles, bears, seagulls, blue jays, you name it, and wolves. So they're master mimickers. And, definitely that's, one of the biggest things you have to be attuned to is when you hear a sound, the best thing for seeing in the bush, it's not so much your eyes, it's your ears and your nose. So trust your ears when you hear that sound. And if you think it's something odd and a mimic, you're more than likely right. And what they're doing is communicating with the other ones.
We had an encounter like that in September, right? Well, we had a group of them come around, and they were probably 70 to 100 yards up the slope. We're on a road. It's 2 a.m, and on one side we've got a kind of a good. It drops down about 20 or 30 feet. And you got a bench down there, and then drops down into a creek. So you got 1 or 2 of them down there, and you had 4 of them up to our right, and they're making these owl sounds that are so loud that are, an owl, if it's 100 yards in a thick canopy and it hoots, you're going to hear it, but you might hear it. A lot of times that canopy is going to attenuate it. But these were just piercing loud, right? Not quite to the point of hammering your chest, but very, very loud.
Right.
And I just want to kind of get your comment on that.
What they're doing is they're letting each other in the troop know where they are and who's who by their voices. I've heard them whistle, chirp, chatter, and it almost sounds like coastal First Nations dialect. And our old people tell us that you just talk kwakwala to the chonachwa. They understand our language. And so when they're doing the bird sounds or other animal sounds, they don't want to use their language, because right away the human knows it's not an owl, it's not a coyote, it's a Sasquatch. So they're using the animal noises just to know where each other is. They got nocturnal vision, they can see good, but bush is bush, and it's thick. And what's the best thing about doing a reconnaissance on someone? Well, know where your partners are. Nowadays our SEAL teams and that, they got radios, and they're able to text each other on wristbands, like those different things you can buy nowadays. But for Sasquatch, they don't have electronics, so their version of electronics for positioning one another, I believe, is using the mimic sounds of different animals and birds.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just agree with that 1,000%. I want to hear more. I got one more real quick question. I'm writing this stuff down that I want to ask. The native language that your tribe spoke and that you speak, here in the Pacific Northwest, all the way into even the early 1900s in Portland, Oregon, the major banks would have translators that would speak Chinook, because Chinook was the international trade language. And I'm just curious if that carried all the way up into British Columbia, up into Vancouver Island.
Oh, absolutely. It was all through Turtle Island, North America, aka Sasquatch Island. We're standing on it. And Chinook it even had European and Asian words in it, like cabbage, kapusta, sugar, shukwa. Had shukwa and of course, saltwater, skookumchuck. And my great-grandfather was a translator of Chinook for sailors on the British Columbia coast. So should you use it? Well, hello, how are you doing? Klahauya in Chinook. So if you come across a Sasquatch, maybe you might want to say Klahauya. Never know, you might get a Klahauya back at you. Now you know they speak our language.
Interesting. Well, I wanted to get your take on that. I thought you would probably know. And so I just thought that was an interesting bit of Pacific Northwest history, that even in the banks, you'd have, in corporate America, you would have translators that had to be fluent both in Chinook and all the other various tribes who had their own dialects and their own language. but when they wanted to trade, they had to speak the Chinook language for the international trade language.
Yeah, well, Chinook was derived before European contact. It was because we had travelers and squires that went around Turtle Island, North America. And so when the Europeans and explorers came, they would just pick up on that. And then, of course, some of their words would get mingled into it. And Chinook, like any other language, is always evolving as it goes, more so with contact, because you had so many different tongues coming here from around the world. And Chinook dialect just evolved with them. Like there was a yellow book produced in the 70s.
I got a copy of it.
Yeah, that's got the Patterson film clip on the front. I remember buying that, and I remember one story in there about a float plane going into some bush camp, and they had, eerie feeling and sounds of something that wasn't just out of the ordinary, yelling. And when they're on the float plane dock waiting for their plane, one of the guys said, "Hey, make the sound." And the guy goes, "Soka, Soka." And lo and behold, the Sasquatch, well, what they thought was a Sasquatch, speculated up on the hills, answered back, "Soka, Soka." Soka is in the Chinook trade dialect. So
that's too fascinating.
Going, hey, what the heck? They're saying a word that we know about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, go ahead, and I just wanted to interject that and ask the question, but go ahead and continue with your story.
Yeah, that was, like I said, my first encounter. My first real good sighting. I had numerous before that. I was at a cousin of mine, him and I, he liked to go for walks in the Alpine. So I remember usually at the end of August, beginning of September, we call it the 10-day closure. We don't do any salmon fishing. But I'd be in northern Vancouver Island, and he'd come see me and go, "Come on, let's go for a walk." So we grab our pack and, usually about 20 pounds worth of coffee and tobacco and dried salmon called gallus. It's like jerky. And off we'd go. You'd usually take a boat, get to a logging camp, ask for a ride up to a high level on their logging road system, and then we'd get out and we'd punch through the timber into the alpines, and there we go and spend, sometimes weeks until it got too cold or we had to get back for fishing. But that was always what we did. And, you knew Jonach was out there, and you didn't pay it no heed because you were brought up to always respect the Jonach. So if you heard tree breaks, and it wasn't windy, or even there's a little bit of breeze, you stopped, turned around, and walked back where you just came from. Then you'd alter your course. And if you went to a clam beach, you jump off. Even to this day, I'm going to go clam digging next week here in Canada. And as soon as I jump out of the boat in the daytime when it's daylight, I'm going to look around at the high tide mark for broken clam shells and cockle shells. And if I find any, or I hear tree breaks or trees being shook, but it's usually the shells that tell you, the broken shells, I'm going to turn around, go back to the boat, jump in it, and go a mile different direction and check that beach out. And if I don't see any broken shells, then I'm going to do my clam digging there that night. What the clam shells are is that Sasquatch, Jonach, is telling you, we're harvesting shellfish at this beach right now. And so out of respect, you let them have that beach. You don't stay there. And if you do, all hell breaks loose. Things being thrown at you, boats being flipped over that are dried up on the beach while you're clam digging, you name it. There's all kinds of stories that we have, that incidents that took place when people were being disrespectful. So when we'd be up in the Alpines, and especially in late June, he used to like going up there. So we go up into the Alpines, and late June was the time where you had a lot of activity in the Alpines. Like Wayne he was FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome. So he was, I'll say it like it is, he was a simpleton. And all of a sudden he'd come back to the fire and he'd sit down beside me. And I'm like, "What's wrong, Wayne? You're sitting beside me." "Oh, you're up there. I just saw two." I'm like, "Well, what should we do? Pack up camp and leave?" "Oh, no, I think we're okay. Just don't go too far, tonight when you go pee." And the next day we'd get camp and we'd leave. And, you'd always hear something or smell something that you knew they were paralleling you. And basically, I think they were just making sure we weren't doing anything stupid and disrespectful. And then, we'd move over a ridge or something, and then Wayne would, "Oh, I think they're gone now." So when I was out in bush by myself, because as a native watchman, a lot of times I lived out in bush by myself when I was a bear hunting guide for quite a few years, specializing in grizzly bears, coastal grizzly bears. I'd be scouting on my own. And other times I just went to bush because I love it so much. And you'd hear something, smell something. Usually what I do is this, yo, Wixas, Majos Yech Onacha. Hello, how are you doing? I don't know who you are, Sasquatch. And a couple of times you'd actually hear, and then just them moving off. So it's all about respect. And that's why a lot of people that are following me right now seen that I just basically launched on Todd Standing 2 weeks ago. It's because him and his egomaniac character, he was proclaiming he was going to help these special forces people go kill a Sasquatch. Well, I don't support that. You always show them respect, and, number one, as soon as you start saying you're going to kill a Sasquatch, and I'm going to go into this part of Alberta to do it, what you're saying is I have absolutely no respect for the indigenous Native Indian people that live here, and I'm going to go kill one of their most sacred creatures they know they have lived with in their homeland since the dawn of our creations. So it's all about respect. And even within our community, as Sasquatch enthusiasts and investigators, I never use researcher until that person shows they've pulled off a Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall interaction with the big fellas and their family, and then they become a researcher. You have a subject to study. Right now, we're all just speculative investigators trying to get that conclusive proof.
Tell us about another one of your encounters, because those are just fascinating.
The one I like best is putting a jig on a Sasquatch. Putting a jig on something means turning the table, getting them, tricking them. So 2012, 2013, we were clearing brush in 2012 off our 250-acre Indian Reserve Island off northeastern Vancouver Island with 2 tribe members. And I told him, we got Jonochas coming about. It's October now. Be wary. You might want to go to the outhouse 2 at a time now. What about you? Oh, no, I got my 12 gauge. I don't need someone coming with me. And so, nothing really happened. We had things thrown at us and sticks and that. But 2012, we started building these cabins that looked like traditional native style longhouses made of red cedar and timber frame. And we had one built, and I knew we were being probed at the end of September. You could see the salmonberry and salelberry bushes and ferns around our camp, especially around our kitchen unit, opening up into tunnels. And of course, some of the salmonberry leaves are falling. And I'm telling them, come with me, you two. And I showed them. I said, we're being probed. I said, one of those hairy buggers is watching us right now. They always got scouts on you. I said, come on, let's go look over here. And we're walking on the camp. And lo and behold, we had this huge tarp up with all of our generator and our compressor and air tools and electric tools and lumber under this big tarp. And on the back of it, at the forage edge, I said, hey, grab that milk crate. We had a plastic 2-foot by 2-foot milk crate, and they brought it over. I said, look at all the grass. Look how pounded down it is right here at the edge. And I put the crate down and I stood up. I said, what? I'm about, 7 feet now, I guess? And I said, I'm looking over right where we sit at the picnic table at night playing cards and drinking tea. And I can see our kitchen from here in the front of where we work with all of our tools. I said, that bugger's been standing here. It's his observation deck when it's blowing northwest. Now come with me. I'll show you where there's probably another one for southeast wind. And I took him to the other side of the camp. And lo and behold, up on a rocky platform, like a little ledge cliff, there was another area that was, the ferns were just pounded down, where something was definitely sitting there on its butt, sitting there looking right down into our camp to all of the points where we sort of congregated during the breakfast and lunchtime and evening meal and just before dark when we went to our cabins. So they believed me that definitely something was going on. We found a track. And then a couple nights later, I'm standing on the front of the cabin that me and one of the crewmen are sleeping in because the other guy went away for the weekend, and my partner that was with me, Darcy, he was too scared to sleep in his cabin alone, so he dragged his mattress into my big cabin. Anyway, he's in there, and I'm out in the front porch having a cigarette, and it's drizzling, so I'm kind of trying to get a little bit of cover with the overhang of the front roof, and there's no wind hardly, and all of a sudden this alder branch comes flying horizontally and lands on the upper part of the beach, and I'm like, well, that's odd. It's blowing northwest. If anything falls, it should be pushed away from the camp, not coming out into the camp and on the beach. So I flicked my cigarette butt and I skittered to the edge of the front of the cabin, and I jumped out sideways, spun 180, landed on my feet and went, hey! Well, there at the edge of the bush, the entrance to our outhouse trail, is this, what I saw was a juvenile Sasquatch, about little over 6 feet tall, lanky like a teenager, and it just looked at me and its eyes went wide, and it yelled, I ran for the front door, and he turned and ran for the bush, and I ran in the cabin laughing away. And Darcy, he's like, you quit teasing the Sasquatches, you're gonna get mad at us. I'm like, oh, never mind. I said, I was just horsing around having fun. I said, so I'd seen it up close, and I thought that was pretty neat. Saw a juvenile. And few days go by, and our garlic's going missing, our apples are going missing, and they're throwing sticks at Darcy and scaring him. So I'm like, okay, I gotta end this. I gotta put the jig on this Sasquatch. Seems to be keep probing our camp. Like, it gets dark, and all of a sudden we could smell something, and you could hear something. We had a big roar at us one night. That sure put us to bed fast. And we had a non-native carpenter at the time, and it kind of spooked him too. And so I thought, okay, enough's enough. I got to make a stand here that I'm the big kahuna on this island, not them. So I put my camo on just as it's getting dark. I put my 12 gauge, I think it was, or my 338 out the window, and opened the window, and I'm climbing out. Well, Darcy looks at me. He goes, what are you doing? He reaches for the 30-30. I said, don't you touch that 30-30. Don't you even do anything or shoot anything until you see me and I tell you where to shoot. I said, I'm going to go scare that Sasquatch. And I climbed out the window, and on my belly, I crawled. But because we'd been doing cleanup, docking alder trees down and small evergreens and leaves, it's, we're building a tourist operation, so it's got to look tidy. So, decades of windfall on the ground and that we're cleaning up. We piled them in big piles, waiting for the late October, early November monsoons to come. And I strategically piled this pile of leaves at the edge, inside the trail, inside the forest wall, leading to our outhouse in the interior of the island. Well, I crawl in behind all these berms in the bushes and using ferns as cover, and I'm being quiet. You gotta remember, I'm a hunter bushman, so when I go quiet, I go quiet. And I get to the leaves, and I climb into it with my feet first, and I pull the leaves up over my head and everything. So just under my baseball cap and pile of leaves, I'm looking across the trail into the forest opening, and, the alder trees and the hemlock trees. And I could see pretty good because it's kind of spaced out. We removed quite a bit of the trees the year before in that early summer, so they wouldn't fall on the cabins after we built them when they got bigger. But anyway, I'm watching, and sure enough, you can see the shadow coming down as it's almost getting dark. And then it gets closer and closer, and it's looking at the back of the cabins, and it's using the little trees and bushes as cover, and it comes right out. Now, this trail leading to the outhouse in the interior of the island is an old skidder trail, so it's didn't have logging trucks on it, but skidder machines back in 1927 when they logged it. So it's about, I guess, maybe 8 feet wide, and it's got a big dirt berm about 4 to 5 feet on either side, and I'm against one of the berms on the west side with the leaves hidden, and the Sasquatch is walking through the forest, and all of a sudden it grabs this alder tree with its left hand, and it's looking at the back of my cabin, and it leans into the berm, putting its right foot down into the trail, and you can see the alder tree bending, and it's using that as support. Well, its right foot is no more than probably 6 feet from my feet. And as he's coming down, all of a sudden I pop out of the leaves. Hey, what are you doing? And that Sasquatch just looked at me. Rah! Pulled that alder tree, jumped up on the bank. The alder tree snaps back and forth. Leaves are falling. I'm just killing myself, laughing. And the Sasquatch turns around, looks at me. Rah! Rah! Turns, and he just goes like a freight train through the bushes. And I'm laughing away. I crawl out of the leaves. Go to the cabin, and when I get to the door, there's Darcy with a 30-30 with his eyes all bug-eyed. And I'm like, don't worry about it. I don't think we'll be bothered by the Sasquatch no more. I scared the living bejesus out of him. He's like, oh, you're going to get them mad at us. But we went to sleep. Nothing bothered us. But that was one of my best encounters with them, putting the jig on him.
I think that's an awesome story. I love it. Going a little different direction with them. How do the native people deal with, or I should ask, I'm making an assumption, but do they ever attack and harm and maybe even kill people? And if
Well,
so,
yeah.
how do you deal with that?
You just don't be stupid. Don't disrespect them. As soon as you disrespect them, they're going to pop your head off. And, our people, they're take the misbehaving children. Women get taken, hunters go missing. It's all about respect. They're tree knocking, breaking trees, shaking trees, pushing dead trees down to you, throwing rocks at you, bluff charging you, chest pounding like a gorilla. They're telling you, I don't want you here, human. Get the hell out of here. Well, you heed that warning and get out of there. If you don't, you go missing. And there's so many accounts to that. And, like me, I lived in bush for decades. That's why I laugh sometimes when I read some of the comments in groups where people don't think I can see them, like the critical thinking of Bigfoot, and where they're backstabbing and belittling the hell out of Tom Seawood. I just roll my eyes and shake my head and go, I've forgotten more about bush than these poor fellers will ever know. And here they are passing judgment upon me. Come walk a day in my moccasins. And it's like I do with people that are disrespectful with Sasquatch, or they're disrespectful and being such a skeptic that they're being militant. I say, guess what? You find your way to Campbell River, British Columbia, you just won a free 10 or 2 week trip with this Indian guide to take you in to live like a Sasquatch. We're bringing no food, and we're going to live like Sasquatches, and I'll have a gun, and we'll have fishing gear and lots of tobacco to smoke and coffee to drink. But now that you've disrespected me so much, I'm going to give you a gift. You come walk 2 weeks or 10 days in my moccasins beside me. And you know what? I've never had anyone take me up on that offer yet. And what it's all about is respect. We have to be respectful of Sasquatch. And the skeptics need to be respectful of we that believe in Sasquatch, especially the indigenous people. Like since people get disrespectful, I say, what are you saying, that hundreds of thousands of my ancestors are complete BSers and didn't tell the truth? And that's indicative of every tribe in North America. Be careful what you say. It's there's a reason why the native people talk about the cannibals of the forest, the mountain devils, and so forth. We know how far you can go with a Sasquatch. Not too far. You push them a little bit, they're going to push back hard. And that's when you get yourself end up becoming missing.
Will and I've talked about that when people are, very dogmatic and laughing and said, "Oh, they don't exist." I haven't actually done it, but I want to say, so what are you doing tonight?
Yeah, basically. No, it's a lot of fun. And I just concentrate on the ones that are positive, the ones that want to believe or are true believers, and it's nice to know that in 2020 that I can push a button on my cell phone in front of me and talk to someone in Western Australia just that fast. Or I'll be told that a couple weeks from now, an asteroid the size of a bus is going to go between the moon and Earth. It's nice to know that we have that ability, that knowledge. But at the same turn, isn't it nice to know that there's something out there we haven't found yet, and possibly 5 or 6 different maybe subspecies or whatever of them on North America alone? Then you got the Yowie, the Orang Pendek, the Almas, the Almasati, the Yeti. Isn't it grand to know that in this modern day we still have something we're trying to find out if they exist or not?
Yeah, I think it is. Absolutely. And I think we got enough time. If you have another story, we'd love to hear another one of your encounter stories.
So we were early 2000s. I built cabins that looked like native big houses. This is the first cabins I built, the ones I own, not my tribe's. And I moved them because they're panabode. I took them apart and I moved them to just north of Sower on eastern Vancouver Island. And we were doing a sea kayak with the Orcas operation there for 2004 through to 2006. And 2006, I had a big charter coming, quite a few people, and a lot of big tides had washed in a lot of logs. And for the people that are listening that aren't from the Pacific Northwest coast, our logs, when they come on the beach, especially at this beach, some of them are leftovers from the original logging in the early 1900s. So some of the root balls and logs on my beach are like 6-7 feet in diameter. And then you get these larger ones, 2-3 feet in diameter, and all these pecker poles coming in. Well, the sand and pea gravel where my kayak should go are all covered. So I told my crew, let's go in there. And I'll use the chainsaw as the tide's rising, because it's going to be a huge high tide just before dark. And we'll cut the wood up. And then when high tide comes, we'll push them out with pike poles, they're called, for logging. And use the tour boat to tow them out if we have to, and clear the beach for the kayaks. So we get down there in the late afternoon, and just before evening, I go through 2 tanks of gas on my largest Husqvarna chainsaw they make. And I'm sweating and I'm tired, so I run out of gas, and I've pretty much cleared everything. So I put the saw down and I say, hey, throw me a Pepsi. And they throw me a Pepsi out of the cabin, one of the young workers. And 4 of us are there, 2 young guys, and my sister came in to visit, 10 years younger than me. I took half the Pepsi down and I sat down in the chair, and I wasn't there for 3 minutes when all of a sudden just 2 trees started shaking like a spook movie where you see something, a demon or whatever, shaking and vibrating. This is what they were doing. So I look at my dog. It's a golden lab cross named Land Claims Treaties Now. Everywhere he lifted his leg, us Indians were claiming it back. But anyway, I go, Landy, get it. He runs up the rock wall beside my cookhouse, and he looks behind these 2 shaking trees that are about 5 inches in diameter. And he just, ping, springs off the rock wall. 180s in the air, lands 5 feet, 6 feet lower. And he's just this blonde golden lab cross with his tail between his legs streaking by me. Now, this is a bush dog, 6 years old, and he was taught bush. Was a great hunting dog. And all of a sudden he jumps in the dinghy. The trees are still shaking. And then this big boulder, probably the size of a dining room table for 4 people, comes tumbling down the rock wall. Well, if that don't get your attention. So I just like, Jesus. So I look at the one crewman who's in the cookhouse. Give me my gun. He goes, your gun's out on the boat. I had my 32-foot, 12-passenger tour boat at anchor. And I'm like, well, give me a machete or an axe. So he's doing that, and I'm looking around at these trees shaking. Right away, bush knowledge. It's don't just look at what's trying to distract you, so to speak. So I turn my head and start looking to the right, which is behind the cookhouse and the wall of timber. And I lock eyes with this big SOB. We measured the next day where he was standing, because we found his footprints where he was in between these 2 cedar trees that were about 30 feet high. And this SOB Sasquatch, man, he was 7'4", and me and him are eye locked. And I'm just looking at him like, now what do I do? And I'm thinking, and all of a sudden he just leans forward towards me, and he just makes this huge tooth grimace. See the wrinkles and tendons and muscle on his upper body. And he just gives me this look of hate. And I'm just like, where's that machete? And all of a sudden he's, here's your axe or machete. And he gave it to me, and I'm backing up. And I look at my sister. I'm like, get in that dinghy. Go now. Well, she turns and she runs. Like, remember, I just finished cutting all kinds of logs up and branches and driftwood. She looked like Jesus Christ trying to walk on water, but it was all driftwood. And I'm like, slow down. You're going to break your hip, for God's sakes. And she's freaked right out. And so I tell Hugo and the other guys, you guys get in the other dinghy. We're getting out to that boat now. And they know from my training, when I give you an order and it sounds like it's an emergency, don't you dare second guess me. You just damn do it. And they're going for the other dinghy now. So both dinghies, my sister starts pulling the line that's going from my anchored tour boat to the beach to keep its bow straight into the waves coming in, because it's blowing like 35 northwest. She pulls real hard, and we're in like a 9-foot duck punt rectangle, which is what flips it over, and there's me, her, and the land claims in there. And I'm like, slow down, you're going to flip us. So freaked out, not to be afraid of. We get towards the swim grid, and we're about 6 feet away, and land claims launches and lands half in the water, almost knocks the wind out of him. He hit so hard with his chest on the swim grid. Nails scraping, he clambers on the boat, runs through the open door. I get the boat beside us, and I walk inside to go grab my .338. And there's mighty bush dog Landy shivering away and cowering up in the forecastle or forepeak of the boat. I grabbed the gun case, walk on deck, open it up, go out, and then you heard that big roar, big screaming. And to the left of the camp, another tree, which was an alder one, starts to shake like you wouldn't believe. And leaves are coming down. It was being shook so hard. This is end of September, so the leaves are getting loose. And I'm like, Jesus, these things don't want us here. So I'm like, hey, you guys, cut the lines and make sure all the lines, anchor line and everything's away from the boat because we're on a mooring buoy. I said, we're getting out of here. My sister's crying. I get inside and I fire up both motors. I look out my side port window and there's Hugo. I try to untie a sideline that goes to the beach and he's crying away. It's a skinny little Dutch boy. I'm like, oh, for God's sakes. I was like, just throw that line far so I don't get in my wheel. And I walk out on the back deck again and I could hear them still yelling, the Sasquatch up behind my cookhouse. So I let 338s in the air. I didn't point at them. And I just yelled at him, I'll be back. This is my place. You might have won tonight, but I will be back. And I jumped in the boat, kicked her in gear, and I wanted to go around the corner to where this abandoned log landing was with this big ship that was a breakwater. I was just blowing 35 northwest, big ebb tide, and this place is notorious for tide rips, so it's like nasty. And my sister like, no way, we're not staying there. And I'm like, look, it's not safe for me to go back to port. There's a big tide rip out there with this ebb tide and this big wind. I said, it'll punch our windows through. I said, it's not safe. So I get out in the mid-channel, and I'm trying to think, and I'm heading across channel to this dock in the little community called Port Neville. And all of a sudden, we come on top of it. We're surfing 3/4 in these waves, and all of a sudden, we come on top of this big green one. And I look at my sister. I said, look out. How deep's your ditch? And she looks out her window, and she looks back at me, and she looked like she saw another Sasquatch. I'm like, yeah, the waves are getting bigger. Now look at Sower, where we're supposed to go. The waves are 4 times as big. That's why we're not going there. So we made it into Port Neville, and she didn't say anything anymore about going to Sower because it was so rough. I told her the wind will be down in the morning and we can go there. And we stayed in Port Neville that night. And, I'll never forget, though, that they showed so much aggression. And I don't know what set them off. Like, on all honesty, the only thing I can think that set them off was I had taken their area over. And it wasn't until, I thought like that. And then I started to piece the evidence together of why. And it's the reason why is it's where my kayak camp is. Now we call it the Sasquatch Investigation Camp because we still have it. And we do investigations out there throughout the year. And I looked at it, and right across, it's the narrowest swimming area from Vancouver Island to a mainland peninsula. Once you get to that mainland peninsula, you walk up the old logging road through a saddle between 2 small mountains, which is low ground, easy climbing, and you come out in Boogie Bay, which is filled with cockles, the favorite food of Sasquatch. And then from there, they can swim and island hop and rock hop all through the Broughton Archipelago, a labyrinth of hundreds of islands, which is the wintering ground of Sasquatches because of all the shellfish beds. And then behind my camp, we have so much activity because I firmly believe that there's a scout always present. We're finding that we have year-round Sasquatch activity there. And the main reason is because it's 25 minutes off the highway, which is the highway itself, where you turn off, is the middle of Timbuk nowhere. And, it takes about half an hour to get to the closest community, and it's all forest. And then 25 minutes down this bumpy logging road that they haven't been logging on in years. And you come out at my camp. Well, it's out in the middle of Timbuk nowhere, close to the shellfish beds across channel, and high activity. And we've had so many, sightings down there. I've had 2 paying clients on Sasquatch expeditions, one of them a doctor and another a professor of anthropology, that have seen Sasquatches within 40 yards at that camp. So it's, an area that we'd like to study there more. Right now, we couldn't get in there for the last month and a half because of snow. But, it's for the people listening. I do expeditions. The best thing is just go to Facebook group Sasquatch Island, and you'll see all my contacts in the posts and different things. I do have a website, sasquatchisland.com, but I don't really use it that much, but it's got my email contacts on there. But the best thing is, just keep in touch with me, Sasquatch Island YouTube channel. I'm at the conferences, and if you want to have a close encounter of the hairy kind, I used to be a guide for hunters for grizzly bears for years, and bear watching guide, whale watching guide, fishing guide. It'll be smarter. Go charter an Indian to go take you looking for a Sasquatch. And chances are, you come with me long enough, you're going to see one or hear one or smell one.
Tom, real quick, I want to ask you about their swimming. That's something we've talked about quite a bit. And, you talk about those islands. There's a place here in Oregon where it's a river, but there's just dozens and dozens of these little islands that only became exposed when a forest fire came through and kind of burned things up. But what are your, do you have any I should say sightings, or what are your thoughts about them swimming?
Oh, they swim like frogs. It's in John Green's book, that Sasquatch Among Us or whatever. There's an encounter in there. I remember reading it as a young teenager about how this guy saw this putting its arms out and pulling sideways, and its legs would come up and kick back like a frog. And I've done numerous interviews with commercial fishermen and native Indians here in coastal British Columbia, and even up in Northwest Territories of Canada and the Yukon. And they say the same thing. They swim like that. They swim like a frog swim, but they move like a seal. That's the thing. I interviewed a cousin who was a commercial fisherman who was sitting on a boat at anchor, and he heard something coming down the bush and through the slough bushes, which make a lot of noise. Grab a plastic tarp and shake it. That's what it sounds like when you walk through slough leaves on the Pacific Northwest. And all of a sudden, this big Sasquatch walked out, looked towards him on the bow of the boat, carving a native art out of wood, and just turned and walked into the water and did that exact swimming posture. And he said it was like a seal, and it swam across the channel and walked up the beach and disappeared in the forest.
Oh, that's we got a spot here in Oregon, between Oregon and Washington, on the Columbia, where they've been reported, the locals see them frequently just swimming across, the Columbia River. And that's not a creek. It's a substantial body of water as far as rivers go. And,
for the ones that are listening that want to find Sasquatch, what you just said there about the river, well, you got riverbanks, sandbars, maybe some farm fields around there with opening areas. It's Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin came up spades with Patty in the forest, which I call the yarn basket, the steel wool of North America. I call it something else, but I'm not going to do it on air. But anyway, stay out of there. It's try to find Sasquatch in there, next to impossible. Get out onto the beaches, shellfish, and during the wintertime. That's where probably we're going to get it. I've used the FLIR and recorded a Sasquatch on a beach in the wintertime, and with 16 minutes of blob squatch FLIR image, but we got a big bipedal out there at low tide, half tide rising, I mean. And I've seen it in my life out in bush. When I got together with Peggy here in Kent, Washington in 2008, it took a while to get this Sasquatch out of the bush. Finally, about 3-4 years later, she's like, maybe you should come spend some time in Kent, Washington. I'm like, yeah, okay. And, I came down here, and I kid you not, I was feral, living in the bush almost, basically. And when I came down here, she introduced me to finding Bigfoot. And I just looked at her, and I'm like, really? If they exist, maybe they exist. That girl there, Renee, saying that she's a skeptic. Come on now. Sasquatch is like white animals and bears and whales and birds. You spend enough time in bush, you'll see a white something. You spend enough time in bush, you're going to see a Sasquatch, hear it, or smell it for sure. And that's when she, because I was getting mad at books I was reading and TV shows, and because they pronounced me as a quackatoodle and my Sasquatch was Bukwus. I'm like, what are you talking about? I ain't a quackatoodle, I'm a quackwalkie-walk. And Jonah is our Sasquatch, not Bukwus. Bukwus is a little hair-covered spiritual creature. And anyway, I'm using this 56, almost 57 now year-old bushman, hunting guide, commercial fisherman, lived out in bush because I hated the concrete world for decades. And my knowledge about Sasquatch, whether it be my perspectives, my beliefs, my encounters, what I've gathered from other people, I'm sharing with all on Sasquatch Island. So hopefully I will help increase your odds coming up spades with the Sasquatch and getting that really good video, pictures, vocalizations recorded, tracks, or hopefully that Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall interaction. So that's what my quest is now is, don't be afraid to get a hold of me. I'll go to Sasquatch Island, all my emails there and everything. I'm sure you guys are going to post it on this podcast. And, I'm here in Kent, Washington most of the time. I'll go out investigating with you too. I'll be in Kelso this weekend. So,
well, you got to do it. Listen, Tom, we have got to have you back on. I got to say, it's just 1,000% pleasure listening to you and having you on the show.
My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom.
As I'm sitting here painting a big native Bigfoot.
Well, you got to send us a picture of it. I want to see it.
Oh, I posted it today. They're actually cut out wood of Bigfoots that I put native designs on, and what they are is you put them on your wall or whatever as a keepsake. But I call them the Foot of Fames, and it's for you to bring to. So hopefully someone will buy it at Kelso, the 4 I made.
You said something interesting about having people go out and see one of these things. And you know what the most important thing is about seeing and having an encounter with a Bigfoot? It's being able to go home.
Not ending up a steaming coiler in the forest.
Oh, man. Tom, we got to have you back. So.
Anytime.
All right. We're going to hold you to it, okay?
Okay, it's been a pleasure. And
all right.
Don't forget to go to Facebook group, Sasquatch Island. Any pictures you need for your podcast or whatever, pull them off.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
I will do that.
Really appreciate it.
Stay on the line afterwards. We're going to chat with you a little bit.
And to everyone out there, halakulisla. Go in peace.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.